Jake Morrison never thought his first day meeting aliens would end with him bleeding on a cold metal floor. The mission had started simple enough 3 hours ago when his squad got orders to check out the big ship floating near Jupiter. Command called it a derelict vessel, but Jake knew better than to trust easy labels when it came to things from outer space. His team of 6 Marines had suited up and taken the small transport ship called Phoenix to dock with the alien craft. The thing was huge and dark, with no lights showing anywhere on its surface. It looked like someone had carved it from black stone and polished it until it shined like a mirror. Strange symbols covered the hull in patterns that hurt to look at. For too long, when they first entered through the airlock, Jake felt his skin crawl. The air inside was breathable according to their scanners, but it tasted metallic and made his teeth ache. The walls were made of some kind of crystal that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Every step they took echoed in ways that did not make sense. Corporal Linda Baker was the first to notice they were not alone. She had been checking her scanner when it started beeping like crazy. Before anyone could react, the walls around them began to pulse with bright light, and the floor beneath their feet started to hum with energy. Jake shouted for everyone to get back to the ship, but it was already too late. The aliens came from everywhere at once. They moved through the walls like the crystal was water, and they were swimming through it. Jake had never seen anything like them before. They were tall and thin with skin that looked like it was made of glass. Their arms were long and ended, and hands with too many fingers. But it was their faces that made Jake want to run. They had no eyes that he could see, but somehow he knew they were looking right at him. The fight was over before it really started. The aliens did not use weapons that Jake could understand. They just touched his men, and the Marines fell down like someone had turned off a switch. Jake watched Sergeant Pete Collins try to shoot one of the creatures, but the bullets went right through it like it was made of smoke. Jake ran deeper into the ship, trying to find another way out. The corridors twisted and turned in ways that made no sense. Sometimes he would run upstairs only to find himself back where he started. The walls kept changing color, and the floor kept shifting under his feet, like it was alive. He could hear the aliens following him, but they never seemed to be in a hurry. They moved with the slow, steady pace of hunters who knew their prey had nowhere to go. Jake kept running until he reached a large room filled with machines he did not recognize. The ceiling was so high he could not see the top, and the walls curved away into shadows. That was when he made his mistake. Jake thought he saw another doorway on the far side of the room, so he ran toward it. He did not see the hole in the floor until he was falling into it. The drop was not far, but he landed hard on something sharp that went right through his stomach and out his back. Pain exploded through his body like fire. Jake looked down and saw a piece of twisted metal sticking out of his belly. Blood was spreading across his uniform, faster than he thought possible. He tried to pull himself off the metal spike, but every movement made the pain worse. The aliens found him there, lying in his own blood. They surrounded him in a circle, but kept their distance, like they were afraid to get too close. Jake tried to reach for his gun, but his arm would not work right. Everything was getting dark around the edges, and he could taste copper in his mouth. Then she appeared. Jake knew right away that this one was different from the others. She was taller and moved with a grace that made the other aliens look clumsy. Her skin was not just glass clear, but seemed to have stars floating inside it. 4 arms moved at her sides, and her head was crowned with points of light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The alien queen walked through the circle of her people and knelt down beside Jake. He tried to speak, but only blood came out of his mouth. She reached out with one of her hands and gently moved his fingers away from his wound. When she saw the metal spike and all the blood, her whole body began to glow brighter. The light patterns on her crown started flashing faster and faster. Jake could hear her breathing change, like she was surprised or scared. She leaned closer to him, and when she spoke her voice sounded like music played on glass instruments. The words she said made no sense to Jake at first. His brain was getting foggy from blood loss, and everything seemed far away. But then she said something that cut through the fog like a knife. She was speaking English, and her voice was full of wonder and fear. She whispered the words so quietly that Jake almost missed them. But once he heard them, he could not forget them no matter how much he wanted to. The alien queen stared at his wound with her strange eyeless face and said the words that would change everything. You are not possible, she said, and Jake felt the world spinning away from him into darkness. Helen Carter pressed herself against the wall and tried not to breathe too loud. The medical bay where she was hiding had saved her life when the aliens first attacked, but now she was trapped. Through the crack in the door, she could see them, gathered around Jake Morrison, and she knew he was dying. Helen was the team doctor, and she had seen enough wounds to know that Jake would not last much longer. The metal spike had gone clean through him, and he was losing blood fast. In a normal hospital with proper equipment, she might have been able to save him, but here in this alien ship with nothing but her basic field kit, there was no hope. She watched the alien queen kneel beside Jake and felt her heart sink. Helen had studied alien contact protocols for years, but nothing had prepared her for creatures like these. They moved through solid matter like it was air, and their bodies seemed to be made of living crystal. The queen was the most beautiful and terrifying thing Helen had ever seen. The queen placed one of her 4 hands on Jake's wound, and Helen expected her to kill him quickly. Instead, something impossible happened. The bleeding started to slow down. Helen rubbed her eyes, thinking she was seeing things, but when she looked again, the blood was definitely flowing less. The alien queen began to speak in her musical voice, and Helen was shocked to hear perfect English. The queen seemed to be talking to herself as she examined Jake, but her words were clear and precise. Helen found herself leaning forward to catch every word. "Your cellular structure," the queen said, as she moved her hands over Jake's body. The light patterns on her crown were flashing in complex rhythms that Helen somehow knew meant the alien was confused or amazed. "It defies the fundamental laws we have observed across 17 galaxies." Helen felt her scientific mind racing. 17 galaxies meant these aliens had traveled farther than humans could even imagine. They had seen forms of life that Earth science had only dreamed about. And yet they were puzzled by human biology. The queen continued her examination, and Helen watched in fascination as more impossible things happened. The metal spike that had pierced Jake was slowly being pushed out of his body. Not by the queen, but by Jake himself. His muscles were contracting in ways that should have torn him apart, but instead were healing him. "Your DNA should not be able to exist," the queen whispered as she studied the wound with growing amazement. "Yet here you are living, breathing, healing, in ways that should require millions of years of evolution to achieve." Helen knew enough about genetics to understand what the queen was saying. Human DNA was incredibly complex, but it followed the same basic rules as all life on Earth. The fact that aliens from 17 galaxies found it impossible meant that life everywhere else worked differently. The queen placed one hand directly on Jake's wound, and her entire body began to glow with soft light. Helen could see energy flowing from the alien into Jake, and his healing process speeded up even more. What should have taken weeks was happening in hours right before her eyes. In our language, the queen said, "We call our empire the Zheltar, which means the seekers of life's truth. For 3 million years, we have cataloged every form of life in this universe. We have seen creatures that breathe poison and eat radiation. We have found beings made of pure energy and others carved from living stone. All of them follow the same basic principles of cellular organization, and genetic expression that Helen felt goosebumps rising on her arms. 3 million years of studying life across the universe and humans were unique. The implications were staggering. Either humans had evolved in a completely different way than all other life, or they were something else entirely. But you, the Queen, continued as she watched Jake's wound close. Before her eyes are something we have never encountered. Your species regenerates, like the mythical phoenix of the ancient texts. This should be impossible, according to the cosmic constants we have observed throughout all known space. The mention of a phoenix made Helen think of old Earth legends about birds that could rise from their own ashes. But those were just stories. Humans did not regenerate like that. Except Jake was doing exactly that right now. The Queen removed her hand from Jake's wound, and Helen gasped. Where there had been a gaping hole, there was now only smooth skin. Not even a scar remained to show where the metal spike had pierced him. Jake was breathing normally, and his color was returning to normal. The Queen stood up and spoke to her followers in their musical language. Helen could not understand the words, but the tone was clear. The aliens were afraid. These beings who had traveled across 17 galaxies and studied life for 3 million years were frightened by one wounded human marine. Jake opened his eyes and sat up slowly. He looked around at the aliens surrounding him with confusion, but no fear. Helen wanted to call out to him, but she knew that would give away her hiding place. Instead, she watched as he flexed his fingers and felt where his wound had been. The alien Queen turned back to Jake and spoke in English again. "We must understand what you are," she said. "Your existence challenges everything we know about life itself. If humans can heal like this, then our entire understanding of biology may be wrong." Jake tried to stand, and the Queen helped him to his feet. Helen noticed that he showed no signs of the massive blood loss that should have left him weak for days. It was as if the injury had never happened at all. The Queen gestured for Jake to follow her, and the group of aliens began to move toward the exit. Helen knew this was her chance to escape, but she also knew she needed to stay close to Jake. Whatever was happening to him was beyond anything science had ever documented. As the aliens led Jake away, Helen slipped out of the medical bay and followed. At a distance, she stayed in the shadows and used her knowledge of the ship layout to keep up with them. The Queen was taking Jake somewhere specific, and Helen had to find out where. The corridors they traveled through were filled with strange machines and displays that showed star maps Helen did not recognize. The aliens had been busy while the humans were unconscious. This was not just a derelict ship, but an active research vessel. Helen realized that Jake was not just a prisoner, but a specimen. The aliens wanted to study him to understand how human healing worked. The thought terrified her, because she knew that kind of study usually meant dissection. Roy Stevens woke up with the worst headache of his life. The last thing he remembered was trying to help his men escape from the alien ship, when something had touched his shoulder and everything went dark. Now he was lying on what felt like a bed made of warm crystal in a room that defied all logic. The walls around him were alive with moving images that showed star systems and planets he had never seen before. Genetic sequences floated through the air like holographic ribbons, and somewhere in the distance he could hear the musical voices of the aliens talking among themselves. Roy sat up slowly and tried to make sense of where he was. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. Crystals of every size and color grew from the floor and walls, creating a forest of living light. Each crystal pulsed with its own rhythm, and Roy realized they were some kind of computer system storing vast amounts of information. Jake Morrison was sitting on another crystal bed nearby, and Roy was relieved to see his Marine was alive and apparently unhurt. Jake looked better than he had any right to, considering the massive wound Roy had seen him take during the fight. In fact, Jake looked completely healthy As if nothing had happened to him at all, the alien queen stood before the largest crystal formation Roy had ever seen. It towered above them like a mountain made of pure light and displayed images that changed faster than human eyes could follow. Roy could see DNA, structures and evolutionary trees that mapped the development of life across countless worlds. "Your captain awakens the queen," said without turning around. Her voice was like wind chimes made of glass, and Roy felt his skin crawl. At the sound, "I am Gelashira, keeper of the universal genome. For eons, my people have traveled the cosmos documenting every form of life we encounter." Roy stood up and was surprised to find that his legs worked normally. Whatever the aliens had done to knock him out had not caused any permanent damage. He looked around for his weapon, but knew it would be useless against creatures that could walk through walls. The display changed to show creatures that looked like walking mountains with bodies made of living rock. Roy watched in amazement as the images revealed silicon-based life forms that fed on minerals and reproduced by splitting into smaller versions of themselves. The detail was incredible, and Roy realized he was looking at scientific data collected over millions of years. "We have seen energy beings that inhabit stellar cores and live inside the hearts of stars," Gelashira continued as new images filled the crystal display. The beings she showed looked like living flames that danced through space and fed on solar radiation. Their biology was so alien that Roy could barely understand how they functioned. The images shifted again to show hive minds that spanned entire planets. Roy saw creatures that shared a single consciousness across billions of individual bodies. They built cities that stretched from pole to pole and thought thoughts too complex for any single mind to comprehend. Yet, never have we encountered anything like humans, Gelashira said as the display focused on Earth. Roy watched his home planet rotate slowly in the crystal light and felt a pang of homesickness. The alien queen had zoomed the image to show human cities and the complex networks of civilization that covered the continents. The view changed again to show human cellular structure in incredible detail. Roy could see individual molecules moving through cell walls and the complex dance of proteins that kept human bodies alive. But something about the image seemed wrong. The cellular activity was far more complex than anything Roy remembered from his basic biology classes. "Your mitochondria contain genetic sequences that appear in no other species we have documented," Gelashira explained as she highlighted specific parts of the cellular display. "These organelles that power your cells carry information that does not match any evolutionary pattern we have observed in 3,000,000 years of study." Jake spoke up for the first time since Roy had awakened. "What are you saying, that we are some kind of freak accident of evolution?" His voice was steady, but Roy could hear the tension underneath. None of them had signed up for a philosophy lesson from an alien scientist. Gelashira finally turned to face them, and Roy got his first clear look at her features. Her face was long and narrow, with high cheekbones that seemed to be carved from crystal. Where her eyes should have been, there were only smooth depressions that somehow conveyed more expression than human eyes ever could. "Your brain exhibits quantum consciousness effects that should require exotic matter to achieve," she said as new images showed human neural activity. Roy watched electrical patterns flow through brain tissue in ways that looked more like controlled lightning than normal nerve impulses. The display zoomed deeper into brain cells, and Roy saw quantum particles dancing between neurons. The implications of what he was seeing hit him like a physical blow. Human consciousness was not just chemical reactions, but something that operated on the fundamental level of reality itself, your capacity for adaptation and survival under impossible conditions. "Defies statistical probability," Gelashira continued. The crystal display now showed human settlements in environments that should have been instantly lethal. Humans living in Arctic conditions that would freeze other species solid. Humans surviving in deserts that would cook most life forms. Humans thriving at altitudes where the air was too thin for most creatures to breathe. Flexed his hand, and Roy noticed that there was no sign of the terrible wound he had suffered. The Marine looked like he had just stepped out of a medical exam with a clean bill of health. "What are you saying, that we are some kind of anomaly?" Jake asked. Roy felt his mind reeling as he tried to process what they were being told. According to this alien scientist who had studied life across 17 galaxies for 3 million years, humans were impossible. Their biology defied natural law, and their consciousness operated on quantum levels that should not exist in organic matter. Shelashira moved closer to them, and Roy could see his reflection in her crystal skin. "I am saying that, according to every natural law, we understand humans should not exist. Yet you do. And that terrifies me, because it means our understanding of life itself may be fundamentally flawed." The room fell silent, except for the soft humming of the crystal computers. Roy looked at Jake and saw his own confusion reflected in the Marine's face. They were soldiers, not scientists, but even they could understand the implications of what they were hearing. If humans were truly impossible according to universal natural law, then how did they exist? What force in the universe had created a species that broke all the rules? And what did that mean for the future of both humanity and the aliens who had discovered them? Roy had a feeling they were about to find out, and he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. The journey to the deepest part of the alien ship felt like traveling back through time itself. Shelashira led Roy Stevens and Jake Morrison through corridors that grew older and stranger with each step they took. The walls changed from the smooth crystal they had seen before to rough stone covered with symbols that seemed to move when no one was looking directly at them. Helen Carter had finally revealed herself when she saw the group moving toward the restricted areas of the ship. She could not stay hidden any longer, knowing that Jake and Roy might need medical help. The alien queen had not seemed surprised to see her, and had simply gestured for the human doctor to join their procession. The air grew thicker as they descended, and Helen felt pressure in her ears like they were diving deep underwater. The symbols on the walls began to glow with their own light, and she realized they were approaching something very old and very important. Shelashira moved with reverent care, as if she were entering a sacred place. They passed through doorways that were clearly not made for the crystal aliens. The openings were smaller and shaped differently, suggesting they had been built by another species entirely. Helen noticed that the mathematical proportions of the architecture followed patterns that looked almost human, but not quite right. Finally, they reached a vast chamber that took Helen's breath away. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above them, and the walls curved away beyond the reach of their lights. But it was what stood in the center of the room that made all three humans stop and stare in shock. A massive crystal structure rose from the floor like a twisted tower. Inside it, suspended in perfect preservation, was a creature that looked remarkably like a human being. The figure was tall and lean, with familiar bone structure and muscle placement. But there were differences that made Helen's scientific mind race with questions. The preserved being had longer arms and legs than a modern human. Its skull was larger and shaped differently. Most disturbing of all were the eyes, which were closed, but clearly much larger than human eyes should be. Helen estimated the creature had been alive sometime in the distant past, but how distant? She could not guess. "We found this being on the first world we ever explored," Shelashira said, and her voice carried a weight of ages. The reverence in her tone made it clear that this discovery had shaped her people's entire civilization. The inscriptions warned of a species that would one day emerge. Helen looked at the walls and saw that they were covered with the moving symbols. Now that she was closer, she could see that the markings told a story. Images of stars being born and dying, galaxies colliding and separating. And through it all the same humanoid figures appearing again and again, beings who could adapt to any environment, survive any catastrophe, and evolve beyond all natural limits. Gelashira continued as she approached the crystal tomb. The warnings called them the Inheritors, because they would eventually outlast all other life in the universe. Jake moved closer to examine the preserved figure, and Helen saw his face go pale. "Captain, this thing looks like it could be my brother." The resemblance was indeed striking despite the anatomical differences. The bone structure of the face was clearly human, even if the proportions were not quite right. Roy studied the inscriptions on the walls with growing unease. "These symbols are telling us something about cycles." He pointed to recurring patterns in the carvings. "See how the same images repeat, but in different arrangements. Like the same story happening over and over again." Helen stepped closer to the preserved creature and felt her breath catch in her throat. "The bone structure, the muscle attachment points. This could be a human ancestor, but that's impossible. This predates our species by millions of years, according to the geological evidence in the rock formations." Gelashira nodded slowly, and her crystal skin seemed to dim with sadness. "The warning spoke of a cycle," she said, as she gestured to the wall carvings. "Every few billion years, the universe resets itself through cosmic catastrophes. Stars die, galaxies collide, and nearly all life is extinguished." The images on the walls showed scenes of incredible destruction. Helen watched civilizations that spanned multiple star systems being wiped out by forces beyond imagination. Entire galaxies going dark as their stars burned out or exploded. The scale of devastation was almost too large for the human mind to comprehend. But somehow, somewhere, the Inheritors always survive to seed new worlds with life. Gelashira continued. "The ancient texts suggest that your species does not just evolve. You are evolution itself, given physical form." Helen felt her understanding of human origins crumbling around her. Everything she had learned about evolution and natural selection assumed that life developed gradually over millions of years through random mutations and environmental pressures. But what if humans were not the product of evolution, but its cause? The preserved figure in the crystal seemed to be watching them, even though its eyes were closed. Helen could not shake the feeling that it was aware of their presence and waiting for something. The thought made her skin crawl as she stepped back from the tomb. Jake stared at his reflection in the crystal surface and saw not just himself, but potentially the echo of countless generations. "Are you saying we are not really from Earth?" he asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer would not be comforting. ZHEL, single quotes, Ace, HIRA, turned to face all three humans, and the light patterns on her crown pulsed with colors Helen had not seen before. "I am saying that you might be older than the universe itself. The cosmic cycles we have observed suggest that reality itself goes through periods of death and rebirth. Each time everything is destroyed and remade." Roy felt his legs go weak and leaned against the wall for support. "You are talking about something that existed before the Big Bang. That is impossible. Matter and energy cannot exist outside of space and time." The alien queen moved to another section of wall where the symbols were different. "These inscriptions are older than my people, older than any civilization we have encountered. They describe the Inheritors as beings who exist outside normal causality. When the universe dies, they survive in spaces between realities. When new universes are born, they emerge to guide the development of life." Helen looked at the preserved figure again and noticed details she had missed before. The hands had scars that looked exactly like the ones on Jake's palms from his military training. The muscle development was consistent with someone who had lived a life of physical challenges. Even the expression on the sleeping face looked familiar. The implications were staggering. If humans were really the Inheritors, then every person on Earth was part of something vast and ancient. They were not just another species struggling to survive, but the universe's own mechanism for ensuring that life continued no matter what. Catastrophes occurred, but that raised terrifying questions about responsibility and purpose. If humans were meant to guide the development of life throughout the cosmos, then every choice they made had consequences beyond imagination. The future of all existence might depend on what humanity decided to do with their impossible nature. Helen realized that the alien queen's fear was completely justified. Meeting humans had not just challenged her understanding of biology. It had revealed that the entire universe might be shaped by forces that her people could never hope to understand or control. The revelation changed everything in ways that none of them could have imagined. As Jake Morrison stood in the ancient chamber, staring at his impossible ancestor, he felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on his shoulders. Like a heavy blanket, the distress beacon from their original mission had been broadcasting for hours, and soon more human ships would arrive at Jupiter. Gila Shira seemed to sense his thoughts as she moved to the chamber's observation port. Through the transparent crystal, they could see the first Earth vessels approaching the alien ship. The sleek military cruisers looked tiny compared to the massive Geltar vessel, but Jake knew they carried weapons that could crack planets if necessary. Your people do not even realize what they are, do they? Shelashira asked as she watched the human fleet grow larger. You see yourselves as just another species struggling to survive, but you are actually the universe's fail-safe mechanism. Every extinction event, every cosmic disaster your kind, emerges stronger. Jake thought about all the times in human history when civilization should have ended. The ice ages that nearly froze the planet solid, the asteroid impacts that killed the dinosaurs, the volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun for years. Somehow humans or their ancestors had survived events that wiped out countless other species. Helen Carter joined them at the observation window, and her scientific mind was still reeling from what they had learned. She watched as human docking ships moved toward the alien vessel and wondered how she would ever explain any of this to her colleagues. The preserved figure in the crystal tomb behind them was proof that everything humanity thought it knew about its origins was wrong. What happens now? Jake asked as he saw familiar faces among the approaching diplomats and scientists. Do you study us like specimens or try to contain us somehow? The thought of being locked up in an alien laboratory made his skin crawl, but he could understand why the Geltar might be afraid of letting humans go free. Gelashira's light patterns shifted to what Jake had learned indicated deep sadness mixed with resignation. That would be impossible, she admitted, as more human ships appeared in the distance. We have run the projections using all our computational power. Within 1,000 years, humans will have spread to every habitable world in this galaxy. Roy Stevens felt his heart race as he realized the implications of what she was saying. The alien queen was not just making a prediction, but stating an inevitable fact. Human expansion across the galaxy was not something that might happen, but something that would happen regardless of what anyone tried to do to stop it. Within 10,000 years, Gelashira continued, you will have found ways to make uninhabitable worlds habitable. Your species does not just adapt to environments, you transform them to suit your needs. The rate of change you bring to any system is exponential and irreversible. Helen watched the first human diplomats board the alien vessel through secondary airlocks and wondered what they would make of everything that had been discovered. The existence of the inheritors would revolutionize every field of human knowledge, from biology to philosophy. But it would also burden humanity with questions about purpose and responsibility that might be impossible to answer. Jake noticed that the preserved figure in the crystal seemed to be glowing brighter as more humans came aboard the ship. The ancient warnings on the walls were pulsing in rhythm with the alien queen's heartbeat, and he had the disturbing feeling that something was awakening after eons of sleep. The question is whether we will transform worlds for the better, Helen said as she thought about humanity's track record of environmental destruction. Just because humans had the power to reshape entire planets did not mean they would use that power wisely. History was full of examples of human ambition, leading to catastrophic consequences. Jalashira turned away from the observation window, and her forearms gestured toward the ancient inscriptions on the chamber walls. That choice has always been yours to make, she said, with a voice full of ancient sadness. The warnings never specified whether the inheritors would be saviors or destroyers of the universe. Roy studied the wall carvings and began to understand their true meaning. The cycles of cosmic destruction and renewal are not natural disasters, but the result of choices made by previous iterations of humanity. When the inheritors chose poorly, entire universes paid the price. When they chose wisely, life flourished beyond imagination. Perhaps that is why you are truly impossible, Jalashira continued as the first human diplomats entered the chamber. Not because of your biology, but because you are the only species in the universe with the power to choose what life itself becomes. Every other form of consciousness we have encountered is bound by instinct or programming. Only humans have true free will. The human delegation that entered the ancient chamber included Admiral Patricia Walsh from the Jupiter Fleet and Dr. Kevin Brooks from the Xenobiology Institute. Their faces showed the same mixture of wonder and terror that Jake had felt when he first learned the truth about humanity's nature. Admiral Walsh approached the crystal tomb, and her military bearing could not hide her amazement at seeing the preserved inheritor. Doctor, this changes everything about our understanding of human origins, she said to Helen. If this being is really our ancestor, then we need to completely revise our theories about evolution and natural selection. Dr. Brooks was already scanning the wall inscriptions with portable equipment, and his readings confirmed what Jalashira had told them. These symbols are older than any civilization we have discovered, he recorded with excitement. The mathematical principles they contain suggest knowledge of physics that we are only beginning to understand. Jake realized that his wound had been more than just an injury. It had been a revelation. The healing process that had amazed the alien Queen was proof that humans carried within their bodies the power to transcend normal biological limitations. Every human alive was potentially capable of incredible things if they understood their true nature. As more humans boarded the alien vessel, Jake felt the ancient chamber responding to their presence. The preserved inheritor's glow was getting brighter, and the wall symbols were moving faster. Something that had been dormant for millions of years was stirring back to life. Jalashira noticed the changes as well, and her fear was evident in the rapid flashing of her crown lights. The awakening has begun, she whispered, as energy patterns flowed through the crystal tomb. Your ancestor sleeps no more, and soon it will remember what humanity was meant to become. Jake understood that they had reached a turning point, not just for humanity, but for all life in the universe. The choice of what to do with their impossible nature could not be postponed any longer. The inheritors were awakening, and the cosmos would never be the same. The alien queen had whispered that humans were not possible. But Jake now understood the deeper truth. They were not just possible, they were inevitable. The universe had spent billions of years preparing for their return, and now that they were here, the real test was about to begin. Whether humanity would become the saviors or destroyers of existence remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: the age of the inheritors had begun, and nothing would ever be possible in quite the same way again.